I've been growing tomatoes over the last several years. In fact, I did a tomato canning video, I think 3 years ago. And I haven't had any trouble growing them and holding them up and harvesting them and canning them and doing all of those parts of the tomato process. But the thing I've never gotten down very well is getting the seedlings going, getting the starts made. So a few years ago, I had made a cold frame, which is basically a teeny tiny greenhouse to start the tomato seeds in. It kind of worked, but the lift on the door broke and it never really cooled itself enough on sunny days, and I would have to bring it inside every night. So it was sort of a lot of work, and it didn't really work very well. And I always had trouble having the starts going from a sprout to anything bigger than that. They'd sort of sprout and then stop. So last year I had tried putting some of the sprouts in our basement under our new LED lights in the storage room, and they actually started to grow, and that seemed to actually work pretty well. So I did a little more research, and it looks like you can get LED grow lights now. I realized that there's this wall in our furnace room that I could clear out, and I cleared out the old oil lines for our old oil furnace, which we've changed out for a much more efficient gas furnace. And what I want to do is build a grow wall in this room. The nice thing about putting it next to the furnace is that I get free heat during the winter off the furnace. So I don't have to heat the space. And with the new LED lights, the energy use of the lighting is fairly low. So the idea is to build a French cleat wall against this concrete wall of the basement and hang the shelves for the plant starts on that system. I built a frame against the concrete wall, and it's only attached at the top where I have some wood joists that I can attach to. And it hangs down from the wood at the ceiling, then just rests on the floor and rests against the wall. So at the top, the frame is pulling out into the room, and that's where it's attached. And at the bottom, it's pushing into the wall. So it doesn't really need to be attached. It just needs to push against the wall. So I made sort of a very thin stud wall. I really didn't want to take out this last bit of oil pipes, as I wasn't sure what kind of mess that was going to make. And I wanted the cleat system to be just a little bit away from the wall. So I have the system work where the cleats are out from the wall, and it gives some space for the old pipes and the bumpiness of the wall. So my cleat system can be nice and flat. I cut a bunch of cleats by first cutting a strip of plywood, then ripping that strip of plywood in half at a 45-degree angle. So that gives me a 45-degree cleat on the side of the thinner strip of plywood. Then I marked where I wanted to put holes for the screws to attach this to the frame that I was working on. I cut these down to 7 feet so that they'll fit in this space. I put the first cleat on at the floor, or just up from the floor. The last time that I did this in our craft room, I made a spacer to go between the cleats. I would put the spacer in at each end and then hold the next cleat up. For this system, I decided to just mark every 6 inches up the length of each end of the stud system, then just put the cleats in at those marks. And I have a little piece that I can clamp to the vertical part of the wall and hold the cleat up while I put it in place. The problem with the spacer was it was hard to get out of the space once everything was screwed in place. And with these being closer together, that was going to be even harder. So I put up all the cleats, and it worked out, and it's nice and flat. I can start to work on the shelves for the plants now. I had gone to the orange big box store and I looked at the prices for construction plywood as I thought I would use that. But the prices for lumber and construction materials has just gotten really high. So what I realized is I could use the pine paneling I'd gotten from a friend's house a few months ago. I've got a big stack of this that I can use for different projects now. So I cut that into strips. I cleaned the varnish off one side and planed the other side. And I could use this for the frame, or sort of the structure for the shelves. My joiner found one nail that I'd missed. It just clipped the very head of the nail. It didn't damage the cutter head. I cut the long pieces to length, and I cut a dado for the cross pieces. So a dado at each end, which I guess is a rabbit, and then a dado in the middle. After I did this, I realized because of how the lights were going to be mounted and that I wanted structure above where the lights were going to go, I really should have divided the shelves into 3 spaces and had 2 center cross pieces. But because I'd put a piece right in the center, it meant I added 2 more cross pieces for the light structure and ended up with 4 spaces, which is okay. It just kind of divides the shelf up quite a bit. The clips for the lights need to go into something, and the thin plywood I was using for the bottom of the shelves wasn't going to be thick enough. So I glued and nailed the shelf frames together. And it's really just a matter of putting the cross pieces into the dados and attaching everything. I put the bottom on with staples, so hopefully it holds it in place well enough. I can trim the edge of the bottom. I had some leftover pieces of plywood from the craft room ceiling that I could use for the bottom pieces of the shelves. Because I had made the cleats on the wall 7 feet, I had a bunch of 1-foot pieces of cleat I could use for the shelves. So I attached one on each end of the shelf and one in the middle. The cleats don't really need to be continuous, and in fact that makes it a little harder for it to sit nicely in the cleat if it's not perfectly straight. I got countersunk bolts to attach the cleats. I wanted something stronger than just screws, as this is where all the structure needs to be. As the shelf sits in place, it's putting tension on the cleat, so it's trying to pull the cleat off the shelf. So I just want something very strong at that point, more than just glue and some screws. So the shelf section is done. I need to make some vertical supports to go under the shelves. If you have a French cleat system where you have anything that sticks out from the system, you need to have some kind of vertical structure or vertical distance between the cleat at the top that's pulling away from the wall and something that's in compression at the bottom pushing into the wall, as the shelf is trying to rotate away from the wall. So these brackets will stop that rotation and push into the wall at the bottom of the bracket. I just attached them with pocket screws, which in this instance seemed to make sense. I got some LED lights that are sold as grow lights, so I hope they work well for that. They're supposed to have all of the different wavelengths of light in them. They attach with a little clip that clips to the back of the tube. I can attach that clip to the bottom of the shelf So this is where I needed a little structure on the other side of the plywood for that screw to go into. Then I can put the lights in. And these are fairly simple where you can just connect the lights with a wire, almost like a plug, and they just go together, and it's really easy. I can put the shelves in. I started with the bottom one. My idea with the shelves and the lights was to have the lights on the bottom of the shelf shine onto the shelf below, which works, although I got 8 lights so I could have 4 shelves, and I made 4 shelves. But what I didn't realize until this point was that the bottom shelf doesn't have anything under it, and the top shelf doesn't have anything above it. It's not like a looping video where the end connects the beginning. So I need to either build another shelf and have it at the bottom so I can use the last 2 lights, or I need to make some kind of simple structure just to hold some lights above the top shelf. But for now, I think I'll see if 3 shelves works, and I'll just use the top to sort of store stuff, like a dark shelf. I got a few new seeds, and I used a few packs of old seeds, and I got some potting soil. So a few years ago, I went around looking to find little planting pots, because you see these pots at all the different garden centers with plant starts in them, but I couldn't find them at the big home centers, and they told me to go to a nursery, so I went to a nursery, and they told me to go to Home Depot or Lowe's. And then she said, oh, but we have a dumpster at the end of the parking lot where people leave their starting pots that they don't use, and you can take those. It's sort of a recycle area for pots. So I've gone back a few times and I sort of go dumpster diving for planting pots. So it was sort of the best of both, where I got what I needed and they were free. So I now have a collection of little pots for getting planting starts going. And I can get the tomatoes started. So tomatoes really need a long growing cycle throughout the year. So you really need to get them started kind of the end of February, beginning of March. And I've got a few of them here. I hope this works. I kind of guessed at the height of the lights above the plants and the number of lights. So the other big idea with the French cleat wall is that as the plants get taller, I can move the shelves apart. So they don't have to be fixed in their current location. They're sort of in their tight, dense setup at this point. In the future, or in a month or so, I can move them up 1 cleat and give the plants a little more space. So after getting everything planted and getting the lights hooked up, I have the lights on a timer now, so they can be on during the day, quotes over day, and then off at night. So they're not blasting the plants 24 hours a day. And I've got a time-lapse set up. I've always wanted to do a sort of long-form time-lapse where you see the plant sprouts growing. So I'm hoping this is going to work. I think I have it set to take a picture every 5 minutes, and I'll just let it run. Thanks for watching.